and today's discussions are about finance. So what we want to look at today is we have a set of speakers and panelists who are going to bring experience from their different organizations of what is needed to innovate in that small-scale farmer irrigation space. We have Muri Agman Lahar from the African Union Commission, bringing us that insight at that African level. We have Nicole Lafore from Texas A&M, and Nicole has been really critical in leading the innovation lab for irrigation, small-scale irrigation, a project that's 10, 11 years old. So imagine the innovation and thinking that's been there. We then will have a video from the World Bank, and after those two presentations, we're then going to have a panel session. So we have Sumya Balasubramanya from the World Bank, formerly of IMI. We have Biniam Eyob from USAID, and we also have Regasa Namara from the World Bank. And we know that you will bring important insight on what your organizations are seeing in terms of farmer-led irrigation and investment. The World Bank has produced a really important publication on farmer-led irrigation that's really helping to catalyze that change and bring ideas and thinking into that farmer-led irrigation space. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Murray to come and give your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Muri Agman Lahar. I work at the African Union Commission. Let me thank the organizers for inviting us to this meeting. At the African Union Commission, we are actually pushing the issue of small-scale irrigation. And the reason for this is because small-scale irrigation is key. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to go over what has been said in the last 2 days. But we know about the success stories that have been recorded in small irrigation schemes in the continent. Personally, for me, every time I hear the area irrigated in the continent in Africa, 4%, 6%, 8%, I know that is the recorded figure. We, at the continent, we're actually doing more than 8% irrigation. And the reason for this is because of the small-scale irrigation schemes that are oftentimes undocumented and unaccounted for. So it's a pleasure to be here. We'll discuss more as we proceed. Thank you very much.
Hi, sir. Could we now load Murray's presentation, please? That's a thank you very much, and thank you.
Okay. I don't know if I can stay here. I don't know. Where do I stay? I have 2 screens. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to make this presentation. It's irrigation fit for purpose. This is actually the result of a work that was done last year. It's published, and as we go on, I'll talk about the co-authors of this work. But by way of introduction, I hope I got this. Okay, thank you. So background to this, the issue of importance of irrigation is stressed here, that the world will need about 32 million hectares of new lands in order to feed the growing population in the next 30 years. And these new lands, you know where it will be from. It will be from the forested area. So without irrigation, this is the statistics that we will need to put 32 million more hectares of land into production. So this underscores the fact that irrigation is key. Also, many countries in their NDCs, the National Determined Contribution, had proposed irrigation as an adaptation strategy in key climate issues. We will also look at, the paper looked at the past effort and in the last 2 decades what is happening in irrigation in the continent. And if you look at the past efforts what has been done in irrigation in the continent, the focus has mainly been on large irrigation schemes. And if you look at it, most of the farmers that were put to operate this in terms of capacities, they lacked the capacity. The schemes were too big for them, so you had a lot of schemes failure. the recorded evidence also showed that about 20% of those large-scale schemes were unoperational. So in terms of capacity, it was very low. But in the last 2 decades, there's this growing, what we call the farmer-led irrigation, the small irrigation schemes. And the reason for this is because of the cheaper technologies, availability of waters, and as has been stressed also, the farmers, though they are risk avert, they are not profit avert. So if there is profit in putting water in crops, the farmer will do that. So this is the incentive for small-scale irrigation. So in terms of statistics also, this is the distribution of the irrigated area across the earth. Now you find out that sub-Saharan Africa, which is this part here, is, oh, sorry. I hope I've not. Yeah, I was going to stress the sub-Saharan. That is recorded there, that is just 8 million hectares of the cultivated land that is actually irrigated in the continent. Now, we'll define what it means by irrigation fit for purpose, because that is the key test here. Now, we looked at if it is fit for situation, is it fit for purpose? Fit for situation is in terms that irrigation will likely expand in areas where these 3 factors hold. The first one is that where water resources are accessible. Accessibility there has to do with both physical and economic access. Then where food security levels are critical, there is high likelihood of irrigation developing. Then also where climate extremes render rain-fed agriculture infeasible. So this is the situation that will spur irrigation development, especially small irrigation schemes. Now, fit for purpose also, it must optimize those triple roles there in terms of improving food and nutritional security, enhancing income and reducing poverty, and the last one is ensuring climate resilience and environmental sustainability. Oh, okay. You mean it? Okay. Now, let me just go to the findings of the paper. She's already flagging me. Okay. Now, in terms of the findings, we found out that for the large surface irrigation scheme, the issue was that they were focused on food security crops. So in terms of economics of scope, they were quite lacking, and that was why most of them failed. Often, they were also dependent on area rain-fed as small system. So these weather extremes were not factored into most of the schemes when they were developed. Then it is difficult to adapt changing conditions. That is the fit for purpose objective that I talked about. Then also challenging to create collective action amongst the users. So these were the findings for the large-scale irrigation schemes in the continent, in Africa and Asia. Now for the groundwater irrigation scheme, which we are promoting, more naturally, they are fit for purpose in meeting those triple objectives of food security, climate resilience, and the rest. Then also, we are able to assess the motorized extraction schemes. These provided greater resilience and profitability was enhanced. Also, I'm just highlighting the key issues there. Groundwater also affect increased farmers' access. Now, we found out that most of those groundwater schemes were located close to market, and because of that, the farmers were able to increase their profit. Then lack of groundwater institutions, this is also flagged here. This is also flagged here as a necessary requirement so as to be able to meet the objectives. We have the recommendations for the large scale and also for the, let me just go to for the groundwater small scale schemes. Now, the first one here, what the paper recommends is to locate water independent groundwater resources. This is very key. There's a need to locate weather independent groundwater resources as we plan a groundwater scheme. Then also the regulatory and management frameworks that we need to, especially in terms of metering waters and access to water rights. These are key. Then the last one is what I've said on locating the scheme close to output market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murray, for setting the scene and giving us real insight on small-scale farmer irrigation and its importance. We now have two videos. The first one is from KREP, which is a private company working on the Water and Energy Food Program. And this focus of this video is about sustainable financing mechanisms to strengthen private sector engagement in irrigation. So cue the video.
Okay. It's an honor for me to be here to present to you what KREP is doing in regard to financing of the smallholder farmers to acquire solar water powered water farms. I am Faith Wambogo. I work with an organization called KREP Feather Services in Nairobi, Kenya. And KREP Feather Services is a private firm offering oversight and backstops rural member-based financial institutions called FSAs. And these FSAs are mainly located in the rural arid and semi-arid parts of Kenya. We are currently running 37 FSAs with membership of over 300,000, a loan book of over 2.5 million US dollars, and savings of about $1 million US. And all this we are doing in partnership with GIZ, Water and Energy for Food, where we are doing promotion. We are promoting productive use of energy, and through financing the smaller holders to acquire solar water pumps. And our main focus is to have disbursed 500 solar water pumps in a duration of 1 year, which is in the pilot phase. To enable this, there are several things that we need to do, which includes the development of the appropriate loan products that are tailor-made for the smaller holder farmers. We need to create awareness and training for around 1,000 smaller holder farmers in this pilot phase, and forge appropriate partnership with water solar pump suppliers for economies of scale and the affordability by the farmers. Our financing model as KREP is that members come together and pool funds, and they are the owners of the FSA, and the funds that they pool together is what they use to access financial services, including the loans. And mainly our loans are administered using the group methodology. That means the Grameen methodology, where everyone becomes a keeper of each other, and they are able to co-guarantee each other and easily access financing, because you'll find most of these solar water pumps cost between $800 US to $2,000 US, which are pretty little amounts for those rural people. Then the loan has been developed in such a way that the smaller holder farmers are able to pay for the pump over a period of time using affordable small installments. The other thing to ensure that there is value for money and the quality for the solar water pumps is guaranteed, we have signed a tripartite agreement between the FSA, the KREP, and the solar water supplier, just to shield the smaller holder farmers who has limited knowledge of this technology. What happens is that once there is an order for the solar water pumps, or the need by the customers, they make an order, the supplier supplies through the FSA, and the FSA pays the supplier in full. And that leaves the customer and the FSA, who originates the loan, and the member acquires the solar water pumps, and they are able to pay in small, affordable installments over a period of time without necessarily worrying that they have not paid the supplier. While doing that, we've experienced some challenges, and of course, the first one is the cost. The technologies are not cheap for those smallholder farmers. Then there is also lack of awareness of the existence of these efficient solar-powered water pumps by the smallholder farmers. Then there's unreliability of the partners, especially for the supply of the solar water pumps. And most of them they are not willing to supply to the smallholder farmers because of the perception that maybe the rural folks are poor and they may not afford to pay for them. Some components of the solar water pumps are very bulky, especially the panels, and they become very cumbersome for the smallholder farmers to take them to the farm and go back home with them in the evening. Then the limited knowledge of the solar water pumps existence by the smallholder farmers is something that we also experience as a challenge. Where we are working is in the arid and the semi-arid areas. There are challenges of the reliability of water sources, and especially during the prolonged dry periods. These are the lessons that we have learned as we do that. Understanding the real needs of the smallholder farmers is key for the success of this implementation. There's needs to create the right partnerships who are very efficient and knowledgeable, especially in the areas of what the smallholder farmers need. And that comes especially to the suppliers of the solar water pumps. The end-to-end value chain evaluation during the design stage of any project is critical to make this solar irrigation work. The involvement of youth population would be a game changer in success of scaling of these solar water pumps. And we are looking at what are the things that what will take to scale the solar water pumps to the next level as CAREP. The first thing will be the good access to markets. That means it will be very important to connect the smallholder farmers to the end markets for their produce, so that then they can see the benefits of doing irrigation and using also the efficient solar-powered water pumps. Then the reliable water sources is something that needs to be sorted out, and this will come in regard to helping the farmers use the modern methods of water preservation. Then there's reliability of the suppliers and who will offer the after-sale service to the farmers, so that if there are any issues with the solar water pumps, they are able to sort them out. Then the affordability is key, and portability. So there needs to be innovation around the portability of the solar water pumps because of the bulkiness. Then a lot of involvement, more involvement of the stakeholders in the whole supply chain, including the government, the suppliers, smallholder farmers, and the financiers at all levels of promoting the irrigation. Then there's a need maybe to give incentive to the smallholder farmers in terms of carbon credits. So there's a lot of uptake, and more investments needs to go to creation of awareness and the training to the smallholder farmers, so that they are able to embrace these efficient solar water-powered water pumps. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
So Faith is beginning to give you insight on the risk farmers have. If farmers are seen to be high risk to access loans, to access credit. Imagine $1,000 or $2,000 loan to bring in that solar irrigation system that will allow them to have that third crop, bringing green energy. So all those elements are really critical. And so an organization like CAREP is able to structure that line of credit, but also help looking across the whole value chain, from all the way through to markets, to ensure that the farmers can benefit and can then really repay those loans and grow their businesses. The second video is from the World Bank, from Joy Basola, and this is a video that's come out from the World Bank Farmer-Led Irrigation Program, and it's looking at public sector financing to catalyze FLID as opposed to private sector financing. Cue the video, please.
My name is Joy Bosolo, and I will be presenting on a financing mechanism that is used to finance micro-scale irrigation for climate resilience in Uganda. I will start by sharing a little bit of background of why irrigation is important for Uganda. And like many sub-Saharan African countries, agriculture is the backbone of the economy. And Uganda is not unique to this, and it actually relies on agriculture, and 40% of its exports actually come from agricultural products. And while about 70% of its population relies on agriculture for livelihoods. Currently, only 77,000 hectares is on record as being under irrigated agriculture. And the country has been receiving bimodal rainfall throughout the years, and this has been sufficient for its crop production. But in the last decade, Uganda faced unreliable rainfall patterns, and recently, between 2015 and 16, it actually had a severe drought that affected its crop production. So this triggered the government to rethink its agricultural production strategy by setting an ambitious target to expand land under irrigation to 1.5 million hectares by 2040. And it is doing this through various programs that are looking to support and expand irrigation, but also particularly targeting micro irrigators to support them to access micro-scale irrigation systems. I will share with you about the micro-scale irrigation program that was initiated in 2019 by the government of Uganda to improve farmers' livelihood by investing in micro-scale irrigation. And this it did by introducing a window in a bigger program under the Intergovernmental Fiscal Transfer Program that looks to improve decentralized service delivery through working with local governments. So this program targets particularly micro-irrigators who are farming up to 1 hectare of land, and it supports them to access micro-irrigation systems using a partial subsidy that covers up to 75% of the cost of the solar-powered irrigation systems and 25% for the fossil fuel or petrol-powered systems. And this program is looking also to leverage up to 50% of the public funding that is going into the program, which contributes to about 24 million US dollars coming from the farmers' contribution. And this forms the unique feature of the financing mechanism, which looks at leveraging up to a certain percentage of farmers' contribution by leveraging the public funding. So how does this work? So there are various actors throughout the ecosystem, and they're looking to support the farmer, facilitate the farmer to be able to access these irrigation systems. And it starts with the local government first by creating awareness among the farmers, letting them to understand the micro-scale irrigation program and how it works and how they can be part of it. And once the farmers show interest, this information is collected through an expression of interest. And from this point onwards, then the extension officers visit the farmers and walk them through how to select the correct equipment for their irrigation needs. They look at the farm size, the source of water, and also the pumping requirements, and all this information is fed into an irrigation application app that we call IrriTrack, that is then able to consolidate and provide options for the farmers in terms of which irrigation equipment is suitable for their needs. And once the farmer makes a choice, then they enter into a memorandum of understanding with the local government. And this initiates the process whereby the farmer is now able to make their contribution towards the cost of the irrigation equipment. On the other side, the local governments, and also through the Department of Agriculture, Infrastructure, Mechanization and Water for Agricultural Production under the ministry, also pre-qualifies the irrigation equipment suppliers under whom the farmers can procure the equipment from. But they also enter into a memorandum of understanding with the local governments to provide the irrigation equipment to the farmers. They deliver the equipment, install it, support the farmers also throughout the process using the after-sales support. On the other side is the financial institutions, and here is whereby the farmers can also borrow loans as part of their contribution from the financial institutions. And the value chain actors then provide market where the farmers can sell their produce to. So far, this has been working well. And in terms of coordinating all the different bits and pieces of the entire program, the IRRI track has been able to enable the purpose-driven design option selection, the cost estimates being generated right at the farm level when the extension officers are together with the farmers, and also to support the farmers to be able to actually find the very case-specific choices for them based on their needs. On the other hand, is also reducing the transaction costs for both farmers in the private sector. In addition to that is the management information systems that consolidates all this information and enables remote supervision by the ministry at the national level, but also the targeted media through different forms has been able to provide a lot of information to the farmers. And this active brokering and engagement between the extension officers and the farmers has also worked really well in ensuring the farmers are facilitated and provided with the right information to make the suitable choices for themselves. So all in all, this has given an opportunity for farmers to invest in supplemental irrigation, allowing for early planting, hence early markets, and therefore improved incomes. And looking ahead through the microscale irrigation program and the use of the management information system, we foresee this system being very useful in catalyzing more financial support coming from the financial institutions to support the farmers to be able to overcome the hurdle of access to finance for their part of the contribution. On the other side is this MIS system can also be very useful in streamlining and simplifying the procurement processes to make it much faster for the farmers to get the irrigation equipment. All in all, so far the program has been able to see 2.5 million US dollars raised in farmers' co-payment and up to 1,000 smallholder farmers already irrigating. And this has also seen more women being included as part of the program, as part of the process, whereby so far the applications received, 80% of them actually have women as co-applicants. So this financing mechanism looks at leveraging farmers' contribution to complement the public financing to expand microscale irrigation in Uganda. In future also, as the World Bank team, we are looking into other financing mechanisms, for instance, the results-based financing and use of challenge funds to incentivize more private sector actors, the financial institutions, the offtake market actors, and also the irrigation technology providers to expand their market reach and also provide financial access for farmers in Nigeria. So look, we look forward to sharing more about these new financing mechanisms in the coming future. And thank you very much.
So Joy was showing it to us that the incentives from governments, local governments, can help bridge that gap, can open up the possibilities for finance, whether it's 75% or less than that. It helps that step. And also supported by information instruments, information systems that can help farmers make good choices and to improve their own procurement. So you can see that it's Finance Plus that can really stimulate this small-scale farmer irrigation. Our next presentation is by Nicole Lefort. We need to make sure that this finance is opening up gender and inclusivity. We need women farmers. We need farmers, more marginalized farmers, having access to this finance. So Nicole is going to give us insights from the work they've been doing on this.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the private sector, really kind of returning to somewhat of what the K-Rep presentation showed, but this being without a supportive institution that works with farmer groups. Okay, yeah, there we go. So, I mean, we all know that women play a major role in ag production in sub-Saharan Africa, but as agriculture increasingly commercializes and amid the push for increased food production, women are at risk of marginalization. And under the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Irrigation, We worked with 4 different solar pump companies across 4 countries for 4 years. I hadn't really thought about that numerology there. And in this case, it is small-scale irrigation. So these are not schemes. These are individual farmers on their own plots. Usually, we say 5 hectares or let, but oftentimes it's less than a hectare. So finance has been regarded as key to developing small-scale irrigation for decades, but the focus here is on finance to women, particularly towards increased equity. And though the finance is on the focus is on finance to last mile access for women, but we also look at this within the overall finance ecosystem. Oh, it's jumping ahead of me, sorry. So women face additional burdens to get access to credit. That's not necessarily a new finding. But, sorry, there's something wrong with the slides. Most of the earlier work on irrigation finance focused on supply constraints. Often, we know these high transaction costs for banks, rural banks that are not liquid, issues with women having the documentation to qualify, in some countries getting permission from husbands to borrow. So a lot of the focus in finance has been on supply. And one of the things that we found in our project was that there's actually a lot of demand constraints. Women are more risk averse than men. There's a lot of intra-household dynamics that limit women's access to assets. This was brought up yesterday in one of the presentations. Within a household, women are often not considered owners of a pump. So even if they buy it, it's considered their husband's assets. And we also found that women tend to want to ensure access to finance for all the inputs, not just for irrigation. So unless they're sure that they have access for seed, for labor and other inputs, they won't borrow. So one of the things that we looked at was the intra-household and demand constraints, as well as some of those supply constraints. So while we all hope for the silver bullet, the quick fix, obviously, we found a lot of challenges to offering asset-based finance. So asset-based finance includes pay-go, rent-to-own, just supplying a pump on credit where it's non-collateral. However, what we found is that for most women, they actually don't pass the credit worthiness criteria, including for the companies that are offering the solar pumps on credit. So it turns out that most of the criteria are the same as what banks would use. So that wasn't helping to overcome some of the supply constraints. We also found that, not surprisingly, women don't have documentation that would be required, but we found a few other things. The assessments don't look at multiple crops when they're doing the assessments. They don't consider livestock and poultry, and the real diversified income that women often have on their farms. And we also found that the sales agents for the solar pump companies tend to be biased against women. Because they're working on commission, they're going for the clients that they see as the highest potential. And they don't see women as having the highest potential, so they don't seek out women as potential clients. So there were some of the issues with distribution and sales models. We tried to work with women sales agents to see if that would help overcome the biases, but we actually found no difference in sales between women and men sales agents. Only about 15% of the pumps that were sold by these companies over the 4 years reached women. And it was for crops, but also poultry and livestock. That was actually a surprise to the companies. They weren't expecting to have a strong market for poultry farmers. So that's what didn't work, but what were some of the things that the companies found that worked? And the companies really adapted their tools, but also the process for assessing creditworthiness. We worked with the companies to identify some criteria that would be more gender responsive, gender friendly. Things like, are women part of a finance, like a VSLA, a finance network? Do they have access to credit for the other inputs? Do they have access to the markets? What is their diversified income and off-farm income? And so the companies started integrating some of these other potential criteria for creditworthiness into their assessments. They also trained farmers on documentation that would be required. And when the women followed that guidance, most of them came back 6 months later and qualified for credit. It just means more work for the companies to have to provide that training. Some of them also adapted their review process. So if it was a woman who was applying for the asset-based finance, they would review it multiple times and in more depth than they did for the men. They also altered the terms and conditions, looking at what is a percentage for the down payment, what is the scheduled payment spread. And like I mentioned, they also tested different distribution models and sales agents. So they did make a real effort to adapt their model. So I didn't plan to read this anyway, fortunately for you. But this just serves to show that when you're trying to reach women with finance, you have to look at multiple stages in the sales process. And the same for projects. You have to look at multiple stages. And the other thing that was important for us was looking at this within the overall ecosystem for finance, because the more successful you are with asset-based finance, the more money you need as a company to continue to be able to lend. So the more women you reach, the more men you reach with asset-based finance, the more support that company needs to be able to finance further farmers. So looking at asset-based finance requires looking at the overall ecosystem for finance. And I just would conclude, I just want to echo what was said in the speech this morning by Fashan. Finance needs innovation. We learned a lot of lessons, but we still don't have the ultimate solution or silver bullet for this.
Thank you, Nicole. So that call to arms to innovate and finance, but also making sure as we design those finance, that access to credit, we take on the needs of women and marginalized groups, and how we design those credit outreaches is going to be important. Now we're going to turn to a panel session to be able to open up those discussions, and we have Soumya from the World Bank, Biniam from USAID, Ragasa from the World Bank, and Nicole from ILSI again. So Soumya, can I ask you the first question? How are the various financing mechanisms for irrigation relevant for large scale, and can you give us some different context for that?
I think it's on. Okay, great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's terrible. As sort of Rachel said, this is like being among friends. I'm with the bank, but I was with the CGIAR and with EMI for a number of years, and I had the privilege of working with different institutions and really coming up with a set of what is it that we know and what is it that we don't know, as Nicole would say. And I think one of the things to think about is when we're thinking about irrigation for small-scale farmers, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, what are the things that are prevented from sort of, gaining the momentum that it should? One of the things that we did with research while I was with EMI was looking at what is it? Is it the price of gadgets? Is it the fact that loans are not available? Or is it the fact that there is just so much uncertainty around where to drill a borehole, how to do it, that prevents this from happening? And what do farmers prefer in terms of receiving support, public support? And so we did this a field-based experiment in Ethiopia, and we did it in regions of Ethiopia where considerably a bit more is known about hydrology. And what we found was that adoption of irrigation packages was actually most sensitive to de-risking the drilling of boreholes. And this is really important. In the sample that we studied, almost everybody who had a borehole had failed to successfully hit water on their first attempt. This is a part of Ethiopia where a little more is known about the hydrology, so the costs of drilling the boreholes are not as high, but it's still around $3,000. So that's a sunk cost. And so so when we think about where to put money, what do we support? I think just investments in hydrology, in understanding what is the spatio-temporal resolution of groundwater, and how do we tap into it in a way that we don't lock ourselves into maladaptations, I think is going to be key. So in the light of this, there's a brilliant report that's just been put up by colleagues from the water practice and the bank on groundwater. And one of the things that they find for sub-Saharan Africa is that there are because it's an agro-pastoral system, you have groundwater-dependent ecosystems. What that really means is that as you keep, for example, if there was that revolution and you started extracting more water for irrigation, it will affect pastorals and pastoral systems. And so going back to the point that our colleague from the African Union is making here, how do we get into place institutions and governance as we start developing this water resource is also going to be critical. So really, if you think about all of these investments have a public goods nature to them. And I think this is going to be critical as part of any investment strategy across the just the economics of it suggests that. Thanks.
Thank you, Soumya. So thinking around the whole system involved with irrigation, from drilling the pump to all that around, that's what we need to, as we think about financing for that larger scale. Thank you. Biniam, I'd like to ask you, how can the finance mechanisms also ensure irrigation is sustainable? In other words, it's not going to harm the environment, it's going to be financially sustainable.
Okay, oh, good. Oh, thank you for having me here. It's always good to be here because, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. I came here in 2017, actually, for a conference here, and we had a great, so it's always good to be here because we always come up with something great, like, for example, the farmer-led irrigation that you've heard has a lot of story based on this meeting we had here, and thank you always for inviting me here. In terms of getting back to the question on sustainability, this is, well, as a government official, I could tell you, like, I work in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. So one of the things that we have now is because Feed the Future is the U.S. government-led strategy, which involves about 12 government agencies such as State Department, Peace Corps, so USDA and everything. So one of the things we have is we have to provide guidance, right, for our missions, for our implementers and everything. So I can point you out to, if you want to look at sustainability, we have a guidance now that just came out. If you go to AgriLinks, called Improved Water Resource Management for Agricultural Systems. We also have a guidance on climate smart agriculture for food systems and natural management. We have those if you want to look at more into the details of environmental and financial and other sustainability. If I were to highlight a few things, you can see, for example, in terms of programming, we have on Feed the Future on Honduras, we have access to markets, Mercado. This worked on farm, household, and community levels in Western Honduras. It matched local, regional, and international buyers with small suppliers of high-value crops, including for fruit, coffee, vegetables, and root crops. So, and it promoted uptake of renewable energy to reduce pressure on forests and promoted, for example, drip irrigation systems. So you have that kind of mechanism that we have to promote sustainability. Similarly, in Africa, we have on Malawi Agricultural Diversification Activity, AGDIV, which promoted drip irrigation to a wide producer of producers. For orange flesh, sweet potato, and other things. If I were to put another hat, since my colleague, Ku McMahon, who leads the water and energy in another bureau, which actually was presented by Faith, we have examples of on financial sustainability and end user and private sector. So for example, similar to what FACE presented, we have on solar irrigation companies that need help in developing end user financing we're talking about. So this type of support can involve helping innovators to develop financial models or connecting innovators with banks and microfinance institutions that will offer financing products to end users. So we have that. If private sector companies are going to sustainably scale and impact more end users with the water energy for food nexus, they need investment in their technology. So investment facilitation is one method to help smaller innovators. They can access direct debt and equity investment as well as currency exchange support. So, so we have those kind of indicators, but in general, again, if I were to go back again to the whole guidance, we also have a guidance on finance, unlocking capital flows, which is more focused on private sector. So you can look at debt, equity, finance, investment, subsidy, and more. There are a lot of highlights there. For example, on blended finance, we don't have as much research knowledge about it if you want to know more about it. But I'm going to stop there because there's a lot to unpack here. Thank you.
So thank you. We can see how complicated it is to make sure the irrigation is not overpumping the groundwater. How can we make sure that that finance is sustainable? So as we're designing these new finance mechanisms that are going to stimulate this uptake of irrigation by small-scale farmers, there are many ideas that we need to bring into the thinking. So, Ragasa, I'd like to ask you the question, how does the finance relate to and support inclusivity and equitability?
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is, I don't know if it is it's working.
Yeah,
or
come on.
I wanted to put it away because there is a lot of echo.
Yeah.
So I think it's really very interesting talking about farmer-led irrigation. Like you said, I would like to confirm that this idea of farmer-led irrigation actually started here in 2017 with the participation of World Bank, USAID, and many other partners from Africa. The very idea came here, and it's now getting traction, and that is really I'm going to talk this at 2 p.m. today. Now, coming about the inclusive financing model here, I think we need to understand the fact that financing is just one facet of the irrigation, what we call irrigation ecosystem, right? For the irrigation to work, there are a lot other activities, environments that we need to take care of. Like, for example, the water availability of water, the availability of off-takers or markets, or the processing. So finance is just one piece of the puzzle there. And for that, for example, we developed what we call fleet guide. So the fleet guide is basically, in the bank, fleet guide is basically trying to help you scan the irrigation ecosystem. And you can see, if you have the chance to see that fleet guide, finance is one component, one very important component. So we developed also IrrigTrack. Maybe you have heard from one of our presenters about IrrigTrack, which is a very important app which consolidates information about the farmers. So that's the first pitch I would like to send. The second one is we really need to understand finance in its broader sense. Usually finance, for some people, it just means pushing money to the farmers, giving credit. That's not the whole story. As we know, the farmers are poor, but their liquidity changes, from in 1 year, from season to season. Also, in many years, they have a lot of money actually. It's just like your dairy farm, in which you get profits once in 7 years. This is basically true for any kind of farmers who are really dealing with a lot of risky things. So what I mean by that is that we need to complement with the saving scheme also. I think there are some activities here, pooling resources, so that the farmer can put aside some money when they have it as a way of investment. And this is possible, as we have seen in many countries. Ghana, for example, it is possible to do that. That's one thing. And then the other thing is also the public finance. It's also important. Sometimes when we are talking about farmer-led irrigation, or so what if the public puts money into it, what is it farmer-led, right? This kind of discourse is also there. What I would say is, when we are subsidizing construction of dam or canal networks, it's basically subsidy, no? So we have to move away from infrastructure delivery to an irrigation service delivery model. By whatever means, if we manage to develop irrigation area, whether it is through farmers' own initiative with support from the government, or through the large-scale thing, the final point is irrigation service delivery. So I think the public also plays a role in here. Like we have seen in the Uganda case, we have to. It's a legit investment, actually, like we are doing for the large scale. It's not really a subsidy per se. It's really an investment from the public to kickstart the process. And actually, the farmers, by involving the farmers in that, by making the farmers share the capital required in that, we are really reducing the physical pressure on many of these countries, right? So I think the public finance can actually help inclusivity. So we can earmark, we can target a specific group of farmers with that public. We have a leverage there, actually. Like you saw, for a diesel pump, it was the subsidy level was a bit higher, lower, and then for solar, it is a bit higher. And we can also do through characterization of the beneficiaries, we can make a proper targeting. The fourth thing I would like to talk about, inclusivity, is about gender. Gender is very, very important. But again, we need to understand where are the women making, as part of the scanning the irrigation ecosystem. Usually, from my experience, particularly in West Africa, women are really very strong on the downstream side of the irrigation value chain, particularly on the marketing and on the storage and something like that. And they need also finances for that, right? So we have to see how to, it should not be just irrigation, but connected. We have to be broadening about the sector where we are also intervening. So that's it for now. We can discuss
Thank you, Regassa, for making us really think about financing that money, access to money in a much larger way. So absolutely, the cash flow highs and lows of a farmer and being able to ensure that we could have the savings there, but also what we're financing. Is it just the infrastructure, or is it the services around there, and getting us to think about other income streams that can support the farmers there. Thank you very much, Regassa. So my fourth question is to Nicole, and how do we minimize transaction costs in order to reach more farmers at scale? Or is it Murray? We'll hand it to Murray. Okay, Murray.
Hello. Okay, thank you very much. The issue of transaction cost, I think that is where the issue of public financing comes in. Now, let's take this case. A very good example is the Farama program. I don't know if you have heard of the Farama program. It was sponsored by the World Bank in Nigeria. Now, it was a tripartite agreement between the federal government, the state government, and the farmer. The farmers were encouraged to form cooperatives and based on their economic activities. Now, the federal government on its own, that is the public financing coming at the state, so they invested in those huge infrastructure, like drilling the boreholes and the rest, that the farmers will not have the financial capacity to do. So you find out that by the time these are provided, the transaction cost is reduced because the farmers now concentrate on just the input that they can access easily. Also, with issue of reducing the transaction cost, if irrigation facilities are located close to market areas, that should also be encouraged, and that will reduce the transaction cost in production. Thank you.
Costs money, and trying to reduce that when there is that upfront is really important. So we now have half an hour for questions, and so you've heard all sorts of insight on the many facets of financing for smallholder irrigation, and we welcome questions both within in this room, and I know we have some online questions as well. Jack, you go first.
Thank you very much. So I'm from the non-profit in the room, and it's my role to ask difficult questions. And the question that I have, very simply to the panel is the cost of these pumps seems to be around $2,000. That's a crazy huge amount of money. If that had been the cost in South Asia, the agricultural revolution would never have happened. That's a bit like asking people to pay $200,000 in Nebraska for a Honda Fit. And you can have the cleverest finance mechanisms in the world, but if the cost is that high, you're going to have limited uptake. So my question really is, why are they still so high? Why are we not selling pumps for $200 and importing, if necessary, with friction-free imports from elsewhere in the world if we can't make them in Africa?
Who would like to take that question? Nicole?
I'll speak to part of it. It's too big of a question to take on alone, but I'll get us started. First, I do want to say that the cost of the pumps is a big range. The $2,000 that you're talking about is probably for an installed asset-based finance solar pump. There are much cheaper pumps, and actually the majority of pumps that are used across sub-Saharan Africa are smaller pumps. I've heard the figure of 500,000 of the petrol and diesel pumps in use, and solar at this point is much, much smaller. But it is important for us to look at not just individual investment in single pumps, but also how irrigation service provision could bridge the gap for people that can't make an individual asset purchase. In addition to obviously looking at public programs to reduce the costs. But we really do need to look going forward about different sizes of farms, different sizes of pumps, and different solutions for those different categories, because we cannot reach all the smallholders with the more expensive solar pump that might be suitable for a particular type of farm, but not all of them. And I think the other nuance here is that the majority of the irrigators are using the more expensive pumps for high-value vegetables, in some cases fruits, then we're also looking at a little bit of livestock and other crops. And so I think there's also it's very important to look at options that can be used for more of the staple crops to bridge the supplemental irrigation and not just dry season. So I think we are maybe focused a bit too narrowly now on individual solar pump sales.
May I add a little? Yeah. What is not costly in Africa? Just give me any piece of imported item that is cheap. So it's a general structural problem. You know, we talked about the ecosystem in general. No, it's not just about the piece of pump. The overall ecosystem is, I think, needs some scrutiny. You know, to improve the logistics involved. In some countries, I don't know, maybe it is better now because we have really very advocated for it. Some of the irrigation equipment are now exempt, I think, VAT and exempt and something like that, because we were blaming that on the cost on that in the past. But still, I don't know if that is a solution already. Yeah, so I think this food for thought for people working in that environment. You know, what really is the reason? Let's say.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a few. Everybody has said the most important things, but when I look at the transaction costs, I'm thinking about even if you think about it, like as long as they can make profit, if it's expensive, they can make profit out of it, yes, you would give them money, right? But the reality is that if you're a farmer in the middle of nowhere with no market access and everything, you won't make it. And also if your size is half a hectare, I don't know. But if you're a little bit larger and close to urban area and you can sell, sometimes we have to be careful about the cost, because it's not about the cost, it's about you can make money. And so the one point I would like to make, so sometimes we should not talk about the expensive, but if they can make profit out of it. Second, I think of it from this is something I'm going to throw out there and here to learn. If you think about it from a systems perspective, the biggest issue we have on those pumps is it's not just about the pump, it's a system, right? Do we have access to the farming system needs? Like, for example, the fertilizer, if it's high cost, if it's the seeds, integrated pest management. And then on top of that, you have the market access. Is it close to the roads and everything? And then the policy system is there too. Do you have subsidy systems, financial systems that are supportive? And relate to that, I'm going to talk about a little bit on the, Ragasa here talked about the South Asia one. So for example, I've visited all Bangladesh, Nepal, India, because I used to be the main person getting the reports for the Cereal Systems Initiative for South Asia. So I've seen with the density of farmers there, the transaction cost has become lower, especially on, if I were to suggest an example, on the local service providers. And the beauty of it was, what I found, what I have seen is, the transaction costs get lower if you aggregate some of the resources that are provided by the local service providers. So you have these two-wheel tractors that I have seen where they can use it, let's say in Bangladesh where you have the water table is so high, they can use actual flow pumps, which would reduce energy costs, and at the same time they would use a two-wheel tractor to actually harvest, weed, pump the water for aquaculture, and that service provider would go everywhere, and they would be very low cost for everybody. Similar to that one, I don't want to put you on the spot, Nicole, is about the, in Bahardar area with the small-scale irrigation, because I was the one getting the reports on the small-scale irrigation too. So I've seen all different places. So in the irrigated fodder that you've done, the closeness of the irrigated fodder to Bahardar was actually a great way to, because there was market access, the need for feed with the dairy farmers is high. And I think somebody from RIPA talked about that in the Omod River, right, over there, yeah. So that kind of a thing where you have the transaction cost can become lower through support may actually help us think in terms of the cost and benefits, market access, systems, proximity to urban area and local service providers. This is some kind of words that I'm going to throw out there. And again, I coming from the donor, I'm basically saying what the implementer are saying and looking at what it is, because I'm not on the ground doing things. So please feel free to correct me or help me learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, I think it's just an important point, though. I think a lot of what we understand about irrigation and irrigated systems comes from the experience in South Asia with the Green Revolution. And I think what we're realizing is that development processes are not Markovian. History matters. And so I think the things that necessarily worked in South Asia may not be directly transferable. The failures, I think, are important to understand, because those, I think, have universal learning. But, you know, how irrigation expanded in South Africa, in South Asia, for example, versus how we go about doing it in sub-Saharan Africa, I think it's going to take different thinking. I think that's what it is. And I think this goes back to thinking about, you know, service models, et cetera, that folks like Abraham, Peter, et cetera, have talked about, yeah.
Thank you for that. What's our online questions?
Thank you. My name is Lacey Bodner. I'm a project manager at Water for Food. I received a question online. Is the lack of security of land tenure an obstacle for accessing finance for women? And if I may, I have a personal question myself. This is about the KREP video that talked about FSA as a financing tool. It presented this as smallholder farmers pay into these FSAs, and then the smallholder farmers receive irrigation, financing for irrigation equipment as their main benefit of doing this. But I wonder, you know, as a personal, someone who manages money, my own money personally, when I give my money to a financial institution, you know, I want it to be secure, and you sort of expect some perhaps small interest rate in return. When you open a checking account in the US, the first thing they tell you is it's FDIC insured. So I'm wondering, when these smallholder farmers contribute to these FSAs, is anyone providing insurance for the money that they put into it? How do we lower the risks for the farmers who pay into this? Because if the money is not staying in the FSA, if it's being lended out for irrigation financing, you know, if a farmer defaults on paying the money back to the FSA, what happens then? So perhaps the question is, what role do governments, NGOs, or multilateral institutions have in, you know, providing insurance to this financing type?
So we have two questions there, including guaranteeing the loans. Who would like to take them?
The issue of land tenure security is something that's raised a lot. And I am only going to speak to some of the research that we did under our innovation lab. And I will say that every context is very different, because you have matrilineal systems, patrilineal systems, you have dual state customary systems. So it's a very complex system for land tenure. And that's different from land title registration. So it's a very complicated issue for us to try to address. What we found in our research, interviewing women over a number of years, was that the land tenure and title was not important to them. They could get land access. What was more important to them was ensuring that they were able to pay for all of the inputs and to use the land to its full capacity. They had to show that they were as productive as possible, because usually they're accessing land through family. And it's a very difficult process, oftentimes, for them to access that land from family. And so they want to ensure that they're using the land to its full capacity. And if they feel that they have those pieces in place, then the land access isn't as big of an issue as getting credit for those other things. And with options of non-collateral credit and some of the other ways that women access finance, having a land title is not necessarily important for irrigation investment. But I know it's nuanced to every single context.
And just to add to what Nicole said, and again, I'm speaking this from the science and what the science is telling us. One is sort of the land tenure versus certification, which are two different things. They're not the same. But the other thing is, of course, just fragmentation of land holdings. I mean, one of the things about smallholder systems, and this is particularly the case in sub-Saharan Africa, is even if you have, let's say, half an acre of land, it's divided into different plots, which are often not contiguous. So if you think about farming them, the costs of farming, you know, if that entire area was together versus if it's broken up into 3 or 4 bits which are not next to one another, is completely different. And that depresses agricultural production. So in a sense, we were talking about this in our panel yesterday with and I see them all here. I see Grace, I see Natasha, I see Peter, and I see Abraham. This is part of a larger process of being in a low equilibrium trap. It's very hard breaking out of it. And the solutions, I mean, I wonder if they're there, and even if they are they even implementable, to be honest with you, because it creates a whole bunch of processes around land and access to land and structural inequities which have existed for, you know, many years, that are by ethnicity, religion, etc. So these are, frankly, I mean, it's a great question, but I think the answers there are no obvious answers here, at least when I put my scientist cap on. It's not clear to me, it's not obvious to me. The problem is, I think, well identified. It's not quite obvious what we do about it.
And Lacey's question about
I don't have actually much answer. The only thing I can ask about, because I'm not a finance expert also, so what I would say is that we have the Development Financial Corporation. One of the things we do is that we have this, most implementers, when they do kind of financing, we have the relationship with the Development Finance Corporation, which actually helps implementers and everything to assess the risks and how to finance, and actually, so in some cases, actually fill the gap in those issues. So maybe you want to look into that. That's all I'm going to say, because I don't know. Thanks.
We have a question here.
Hi everyone, my name is Irrigation. I'm with Lindsay Corporation. So my question is kind of more focusing on the cost and quality of irrigation equipment. So what role the irrigation industry can play to provide affordable irrigation solutions to the small scale farmers? And where do you guys see irrigation manufacturing industry fits into the equation when it comes to providing cost-effective, high-quality solutions to those irrigators?
I think I just would like to build on what I discussed about the irrigation ecosystem approach, and particularly about the Irrig Track, an app we have developed. The idea of that is we will have a catalog of suppliers for a specific piece of equipment, and that incites competition. So the guarantee is actually, instead of regulatory work may not work that effectively, but when you incite competition between different suppliers, that guarantees quality, right? So I think the mechanism is really to induce competition. And as you know, as part of the puzzle to the cost issue is that the players, the suppliers are very limited also, you see. So it's a kind of monopoly pricing, that's why they do. But this is breaking, right? As the system is maturing, as the system is getting off the ground, I think these issues will be sorted out. And plus to that, also the ministry, the relevant ministry has to have a guidance for that, a minimum requirement, working requirement for any piece of equipment. That's my view anyway. Thanks.
I think you're on spot. That's where policy comes in. You must have policy for standards. You must have policy for liberalizing the market so that you don't have somebody monopolizing the market. So that push in the fear you are raising, that if the policy is there, and that is the role of government, the enabling environment is created, the farmers are not risk averse, they know where to go. Thank you.
So making sure we're financing good quality equipment that's going to be able to support the payback of loans. Question? Would you like a question?
Thank you so much. I'm Chris. One question. I think why irrigation equipments are expensive, especially in Africa. One, we don't manufacture those equipments. You find that in the irrigation ecosystem, equipments are manufactured, let's say, take an example, in China. We have retailers, we have wholesalers, we have middlemen, we have other dealers that are selling those equipment to the smallholder farmers, which led to make it more expensive. My question is, like all of you, you're like financing agents. How do you measure the impact, how success of financing those irrigation, maybe schemes or smallholder farmers are making impact? For example, you paid finance, like we have seen someone from Uganda, they said they finance 75% on solar, 25% on petrol or diesel pumps. How do you measure that impact? Sometimes farmers knows what they want, but like because of the government policies and their target is just to show that we have done this. So as funders, how do you measure the impact?
Again, I would like to base on our experience, limited. You are from Rwanda, so you know a lot about the farmer-led irrigation development. So we have indicators, preset indicators in Irriga also, and as you said, the monitoring and evaluation is part and parcel of the program there. So we have really well through thought monitoring and evaluation program there. One of it is, for example, who are the, we were able to talk about the number of women who are participating in this. That is the result of that one. And we are also going forward measuring yields, how many times during the year they are going to grow, what kind of crop they grow. So these kind of traditional measures are there, and we are also complementing with remote sensing information, for example, to the extent possible. So there, I think what I can say is you need to put a very robust monitoring and evaluation component to that program, really, so that you can tell the story and also convince donors and even the government, no? It has many multi-functions, actually, that kind of piece of information. Anybody?
Yeah. Oh, Nicole first.
Yeah, I think a key term here is traditional measures. I think that a lot of the indicators we're now using for farmer-led irrigation have come from irrigation schemes and the larger public systems. Even that said, a lot of projects in the larger schemes did not measure success the same. And it's one of the difficulties of understanding whether large-scale schemes or medium-scale schemes are successful is because there's so many different ways of measuring. And I do see us moving to additional measures of success for farmer-led irrigation. As I mentioned, a lot of farmer-led irrigation is in high-value crops, so vegetables, fruits. It's also in livestock, poultry, irrigated fodder. And some of the measures from the schemes are not very suitable to small-scale irrigation. So I don't have a clear answer except to say that I think we are seeing a demand or a shift towards a little bit more adapted indicators of success for farmer-led irrigation instead of just taking the large-scale scheme measures wholesale.
Yes, in general, when I think from USAID perspective on measures, I think from a few different perspectives. We have, since I work in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, we have two major funding sources: global water security, which is different, mostly focused on water and sanitation and drinking. The other one is on global food security, just basically on resilience, outlet growth, and nutrition, right? So whenever we have any projects, we have Feed the Future indicators. I don't know how many of you know that. So every year you have to report, right? The issue, that is one way. The second way to think about it is for every project we fund, we have either performance evaluation or impact evaluation. The impact evaluation is very hard because most of the funding and resource is done by the country themselves, right? The government, the farmers themselves, everybody. So we don't say, hey, we did this. It's because most of the work actually is done by, the government themselves or the farmers. So it's very hard to know where our where our contribution is. So we have to be very careful on those nuances, and even on the indicators themselves. It's nice to have indicator for everything, right? But the problem is that how many of them would report, and then we have to go back to Congress and everything. It's very hard. So, and imagine if you're an implementer, you have so many indicators to do. You would not want that in some way. So we have to be very careful. So one of the things we have was, actually as an indicator, was a number of water sustainability assessment. We had that, but not many people were reporting on it. So if many people don't report on it, guess what? We cannot use it because it has to aggregate that to make sure that, hey, we contributed to this, it gets harder. So in terms of measuring is not, especially on financing irrigation, we have on how many hectares are irrigated. We have that indicator, for example, as a general. And we have it on disaggregations for male and female. So just want to throw those out there to to make sure that some of the nuances that I see from my end. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one last question. Your patience is very much appreciated. Thank you for making sure you moved into the eye.
Oh, thank you very much. I am from Kazakhstan, Central Asia. My name is Janai. So one of the problems what we face in Central Asia, it's one of the group of developing countries. Quite often donors gives money to middle group. When it reaches to farmers, it takes a long chain of middle group. And my question is related to capacity building. So it's very important to allow farmers, end users, women to make decision what kind of equipment they will buy. And for example, they need proper support in TVET, technical vocational training. They should make decision. We are missing proper TVET training program, extension program. Simply, they are not so user-friendly. Quite often, scientific researchers or middle people, they develop something and they make decision for end users. This is a huge problem in developing countries. So, for example, when you extract water, it could be big depletion of the aquifer. So it's necessary to put back water. For example, when we have floods, so it's good to put injections, use managed aquifer recharge, for example. So it's one type of training. And now it's hydrogen technologies are expanding worldwide. It's necessary to teach how hydrogen could be used by end users. So it's the chain of the trade programs are very important to develop and set up. So do you work in this direction? Do you support this type of program, capacity building for end users, for farmers, so they can use flat mar technology, hydrogen technology, and selection of irrigation technology? What was a question about drip irrigation, pivot, or the subsource irrigation? So it's big issue. What technology to use? So people should be trained at the end, not here, but at the end. So I think this is a huge problem. So my question about it, do you work in this direction? Do you set up extension TVET program? Actually, I'm looking for this type of training program. If you have, maybe to make connection and adapt it for Central Asia. Thank you.
Anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah. Thanks. So I think you raised a very important aspect, capacity building. So in the fleet guide I talked about, the capacity building, the knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer is one of the key elements. So for example, we launch radio programs, for example. We taught radio transmitting knowledge through radio is much more effective for rural dominated areas. For example, in Uganda, we use radio platforms to convey information about different technologies. We produced also guides, technical guides, in a very understandable language. And so we have these kind of programs. And as you rightly said, it's a very important package. Like financing, this is also another angle that you have to complement for the ecosystem to thrive, right? That's basically what I'd like to say.
And again, just very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, I think you raise a great point, because a lot is changing about agricultural systems in general. Not just because of climate change, but also because of increasing feminization of agriculture in a lot of places. So if you look at traditional models of agricultural extension, they typically look at, and this is again the science of this, right? It's really about training the lead farmer, which very often happens to be a male. But with feminization, and particularly in Central Asia, where there's so much of male migration, men may not be the entry points for training anymore. So that may very well mean working with women to instill capacity. And we've talked about this in the Tajikistan context, because I've had some experience while I was with IME, working in Tajikistan, working with USA to figure these questions out. But again, how we do it, we have to be careful about it, because in my experience as a development economist, I've yet to see an idle woman. You have lots of things to do, and then you end up doing more things. And so one of the key questions I like to think about, and this is a gender neutral thing, how do we reduce drudgery? Because no matter what you're motivated by, if you're a sentient being, we don't like drudgery. So how can we make things less laborious? What are the ways in which we could organize ourselves and our institutions and our programs to really just reduce drudgery is really going to be important, because the opportunity cost of time is pretty high. So at one level, it perhaps is a call for all of us to shift, and if people are our biggest resource, which arguably they are, maybe we need to be thinking about that too as we start thinking about, how do we design programs, how do we get this to people in the way that's easiest and to work with for all sides. So that's also something to think about.
Thank you, Soumya. And we are going to have to bring this to a close. So today we've been listening about the critical part of finance in that irrigation ecosystem for smallholder farmers. And we've heard public and private and the many aspects, the many dimensions to that we really need to bring that innovation to if we are going to get that scaling and outreach of these solutions to developing food security. So thank you very much for joining us today, both here in the room and online. I want to thank our timekeeper and Lacey for manning the online questions, and of course our panelists, Soumya, Bini, and Ragasa, Nicole and Murray for joining us today. This afternoon at 2 o'clock, we're going to be in room B2, where we're going to look at policy this time and the importance of policy for supporting smallholder farmer irrigation. So enjoy your lunch, and hopefully we'll see you at 2. Thank you.